Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 50th ever Highlight Haven interview. My name is Matthew Heiserman, and today we are joined by A to Z Sports NFL and college football analyst Ryan Roberts. Ryan, it's great to have you on.
I appreciate you for having me on, Matthew. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely, and let's get right into it. I just want to start by asking when you first knew that you wanted to work in the sports industry.
Man, it's a loaded question, I guess. I think everybody has kind of a unique journey in that
Yeah.
type of a question. For me, I always knew I wanted to be around the game of football since I was about like 8 years old. But like at that point, I thought I was going to be an NFL player. You know what I mean? I thought I was going to be that guy. I thought I was going to be a professional athlete. And then when I got into college, I went to Frostburg State University. I was still playing football at that point, but I had recurring issues with my shoulders. I've had double labrum
Yeah.
surgeries. I've had like my shoulders have been through the ringer. So I was only playing D3 football, and I kind of had a little bit of a realization of like, hey, you're probably not going to the NFL, right? Like I probably wasn't going to. So I had
Yeah.
to kind of make a little bit of a I had to make the next step towards my football journey, I guess, but I didn't really know how to do that. So I became just a regular student like I was, and I wanted to stay around the game. So I started coaching, started freelance writing on the side, just kind of sticking around football as much as I could. And it's kind of like one of those imperfect roads, to be honest with you. I mean, like over the years, it's just been like I've written for so many different publications. I've organically grown on Twitter or X, whatever, in that space. And eventually you just get opportunities, right? If you're good or you're unique at what you do and you have a following. So I've known since I wanted to be 8 years old, but I honestly I didn't know I would be in like this side of the business. Like again, for a while I thought I was going to be player, then I thought I maybe was going to be a coach, and then eventually I got to the content creation side. So it's been a wild journey, man. Very very wild journey to say the least.
Yeah, and I love to hear that journey and getting a little bit into the NFL draft. The Cleveland Browns obviously have the second overall pick in the 2025 NFL draft. Assuming the Titans select Cam Ward at number one, do you see the Browns taking Shador Sanders with that pick, or maybe avoiding a quarterback there if they don't think Sanders is a franchise guy, targeting someone like Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter?
Yeah, the Cleveland Browns are a very interesting case because they're in a very strange window as far
Yeah.
as their regime goes, right? Like Kevin Stefanski has done a lot of good with Cleveland. I mean, he was just in the playoffs 2 years ago, but you're coming off a really bad year, and then the roster is very seemingly overnight kind of gone downhill a little bit, right? Like you need a new left tackle, you need a new quarterback, you need a wide receiver or two to go along with Jerry Judy, and all defensively you need a couple spots too. So like this roster's in a lot of need, which is not a great place to be in when you're a coach that's trying to have a little bit of a bounce back year. But I really do think that at first I thought it was going to be Shador Sanders. I thought we were going to be quarterback one and two. The
Mhm.
closer we get to the big day, and we're only a few weeks out, obviously at this point, I lean more towards it being a best player available conversation because there seemed to be there's a lot of smoke right around the Cleveland Browns pursuing potentially a Kirk Cousins in the trade market and maybe going quarterback in probably second, third round, like somewhere in that conversation, more of a developmental guy. And I just personally just think if you're going to go the veteran routes early and you have a coach that needs a big bounce back win, a bounce back season, excuse me, I think the best route is probably to go best player available. So whether that's Abdul Carter to pair him with Miles Garrett, or that is Travis Hunter to play either wide receiver or moonlight as a corner, or vice versa, I do think that that brings a lot of potential. So as of today, I would say it's best player available and probably not a quarterback.
Yeah, now the New York Giants have the third overall pick in the draft.
Mhm.
Do you see them potentially going with a quarterback here if there is one available? Maybe they want to take Sanders or potentially take Jackson Dart with the third pick. Or do you think that since they recently got Russell Wilson, since they got Jameis Winston, is that a sign that they're going to hold off on a quarterback this year, maybe look towards one in the future?
Well, similar to what I just said with Cleveland, I think it's the same situation for New York, but
Mhm.
in a
Yeah.
much more dire situation. Like you have a general manager in Joe Shane that is on his last leg. You have a head coach in Brian Dayball who's on his last leg. Like they need a big season. So I think that it wouldn't be shocking if they went quarterback at three, but right now I think it would be a really just I wouldn't understand the process of
Yeah.
it because, like
Mhm.
you said, you got Russell Wilson. He's going to be your starting quarterback in 2025. You got Jameis Winston as an security blanket. You have that room patched up for the short term, but honestly, like this team needs to win in 2025,
Mhm.
right? Like they need to be able to preserve jobs, both head coach and general manager alike. So I think it would be a really ill-advised move after getting Russell Wilson, after getting Jameis Winston, to also go and draft a quarterback with the third overall pick. So I think right now, if I was a betting man, I would say again they're either a best player available spot, whether that is Abdul Carter, whether that is Travis Hunter, or they could be a trade back option as well.
Yeah.
Like that's a roster that needs several different needs. So I wouldn't be shocked if they just said, "Hey, we're gonna for a quarterback needy team that wants to come up, we'll trade back and then we'll collect assets throughout the draft." I just don't think a quarterback is in their cards at least early on in the draft this year.
And a name that I just mentioned was Jackson Dart, and he's an interesting one because it feels like he could either go top 10. I know he's been rumored to potentially go ahead of Shador Sanders, and then it also feels like there's a world where he could end up in the second round. If you had to predict right now, where do you see him landing currently?
I think he's more of a day two player, so second to third round, and I think that's where he's going to end up going. There's a lot of conversation around it, but you have to look at trends in the draft space, right?
Yeah.
And the trends say that quarterbacks absolutely can rise, happens every single year. But then there's also some times where, and I think back to the 2022 NFL draft, where we hyped up throughout the process Malik Willis first round, Malik Willis first round, Malik Willis first round.
Mhm.
But on the other side of the coin, we forget that it only matters what the NFL really thinks, right? So we're
Yeah.
talking about us as evaluators and the media side, but the NFL is the one that's pulling the gun on these types of situations. So I believe he is a player that some people like, but I personally just not talked to any sources on the NFL side that I have that have told me Jackson Dart, quarterback two, Jackson Dart, top 10 NFL draft pick. Is it possible a team trades back into late in the first round to secure Jackson Dart? It's possible.
Mhm.
But if you ask me what's more likely today, he goes top 10 to 15 or he goes second rounds, I would definitely say that second round is the more likely spot right now.
Yeah, now the last general player that I want to focus on before we get into some more specifics is Xavier Restrepo out of Miami. And I know you had a scouting report of him, I believe, yesterday with A to Z Sports. And I want to talk about him a little bit. During Miami's pro day last Monday, Restrepo ran a 4.83 40-yard dash. He blamed the slow time due to a right hamstring uh,
Yep.
tightening up before he started running. How much could that 40-yard dash end up affecting his draft stock as he gets closer to the draft? Or is it something that, by late April, teams are gonna kind of have brushed off by then?
I mean, it really depends if the hamstring issue is legitimate,
Mhm.
right? Because
Yeah.
unfortunately, we're in a space where that stuff does happen,
Mhm.
and that is a little bit of context for why someone would not run fast. But then the other side, Matthew, and this is the kind of the shady part of the business is sometimes people lie, right? And they
Yeah.
and they
Yeah.
don't tell the
Yeah.
full truth.
Mhm.
And he didn't actually have a hamstring tweak. It's just an
Mhm.
excuse. I'm not saying that Xavier Restrepo
Yeah.
did that. I'm just saying it has happened where players are like, oh, hamstring tightened up or calf pull or whatever it would be. Like those things do happen, right? So it is solely dependent on if the hamstring is legitimate. If it's not legitimate and there's no truth to it, then it could sink his draft stock. It
Mhm.
could because 483, and we'll even give him the benefit of the doubt because there was a range between like 476 to 483, like
Yeah.
in that ballpark, right? Like some scouts had him at different spots. Even if we said, okay, 476, or we'll meet in the middle, we'll say 479 for argument's sake, whatever. That is a historically poor time for a wide receiver.
Mhm.
Like if you're talking about I went and looked at mock draftable, which showcases since 1999. It shows every testing number basically, and it
Mhm.
gives you like percentiles and all that type of stuff. But for anybody that ran a 475 or slower, if you're trying to find legitimate contributors on the NFL level wide receiver, like they just
Mhm.
don't really exist. Like there
Yeah.
just isn't that much. There isn't that much proof that a 477 or 478 or whatever you want to give him in this conversation that translates to the NFL. Like that's a really bad spot to be in. Even if you move it down and you say, hey, we'll just argument's sake again, we'll say you ran 4.7 flat, right? 4.71, whatever. It's still not a great list. I mean, yes, you're going to find a Jarvis Landry, you're going to find a Keenan Allen, but like
Mhm.
for the most part, we are talking about two in like 50 that just turned out well and the rest didn't, right? So that is dangerous territory because although he's a slot receiver and speed is not as big of a need necessarily playing inside in the slot, you still do need requisite speed to play against NFL athletes. Like that's just pretty basic stuff, right? So I think that it is going to hurt him for sure if it's legitimate, but it really just depends on what that background of the hamstring is and if he is able to run in some they do like kind of the more private workouts for teams, kind of more closer to the
Yeah.
draft. If he's able to run for a couple teams and he's able to do better after that hamstring hopefully gets better, then this might be a complete conversation. But if that is the last number he ran and there was no hamstring issue, then that's when we're talking about it potentially being a little bit of a dark alley.
And it's hard to believe that there wasn't a hamstring injury because he said that he was consistently running, I believe, between like 4.53 and 4.57 up to that point. Maybe it was just a rough day for him. But that will start to get, I guess, a little more uncovered as we get closer to the draft. And getting
Yep.
into the Commanders a little bit, their wide receiver room currently consists of Terry McLaurin. Obviously, they just got Deebo Samuel, and then Noah Brown, Luke McCaffrey, KJ Osborne. They did lose as well Diame Brown and Olamide Zaccheaus in free agency. And getting into their slot a little bit, I think they have some guys that could play in that area. Terry could fit in there if he needs to, Deebo Samuel. But I think the main guys that are consistently utilized in that area right now are KJ Osborne and Luke McCaffrey. So if they wanted to potentially get a better slot receiver, who's someone that they could potentially target towards the end of the draft to fill that role?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of guys honestly that could fill that role a little bit. I mean, it really depends on how much later we're talking in the draft. Like a Jack Besh out of TCU somewhere on on day two would be a interesting conversation. He's kind of 6'1", 205, 210. He's played kind of in between a little bit, but he's physical. Started his career at LSU, so he's a nice athlete, but he's more of a short area athlete, pretty explosive in tight quarters. A lot of people are comparing it to Puka Nakua, and obviously Puka Nakua is a guy for the Rams that could play inside in the slot if you needed to, and I expect him to play that more now that Cooper Kupp is in Seattle. But he's an interesting guy. I think Daniel Jackson's one of my favorite day three sleepers as a potential slot receiver out of Minnesota. Doesn't get much conversation because he's 5'11", he's 195 pounds. He's not like a dynamic overall physical talent, but he's just really smart, crafty, and he's kind of similar to a little better athlete than Xavier Restrepo, but Restrepo's another guy that you're probably going to get a day three value on him at this point, especially if we're talking about that legitimacy of the 40-yard dash that he ran. So he's a guy that played exclusively at Miami in the slot. Really good change of direction player, really strong hands, does the physical work that you need in the slot as well. Like he'll block, he'll do all those types of little things as well. So Restrepo, Daniel Jackson, it really just depends where you're looking for it, right? Like even if it's a late day two, like I talked with Besh, I like Jalen Royals out of Utah State a lot in this class as well. He's kind of more that dense, like 5'11", 210-pound guy that can work after the catch. So there's a lot of different guys in this class that could potentially fill that role, but I think those are a few guys that make a lot of sense depending on where you're looking at him in the draft.
Yeah, and on the defensive side of things, the Commanders' starting linebackers are Bobby Wagner and Frankie Louvu. It may not be a top priority for Washington, but considering the fact that Wagner will be turning 35 years old before the start of the season, there's also a stat where he played, I believe, just under 99% of defensive snaps for the Commanders last season. I think it was a total of 1,017 defensive snaps. That's obviously a lot for an aging player. He was one of the best
Yep.
linebackers in the league last season, but you have to imagine that we see that decline soon. And then Luvu is still pretty young. I think he's 29 years old. But if the Commanders want to add some extra youth to that position, who's someone they could potentially target towards the middle of the draft to do so?
Yeah, I mean, there's some ranges on a guy like a Demetrius Knight out of South Carolina, who's one of my favorite players in this draft, just overall. I mean, he had a fascinating backstory. He was like a Georgia quarterback, eventually ended up at Charlotte, and then transferred to South Carolina his pet
Yeah.
for his last year in college. And I mean, he would be perfect if you're talking about him in like the third rounds, maybe slips to the fourth round as kind of an understudy to a Bobby Wagner, and then eventually he's your Mike linebacker, maybe in 2026. Like that dude's physical. He's really explosive. He ran like 4.58 at the combine. So that's a guy that is really intriguing to me. If we're talking about other Mikes in the draft, I think a value maybe a little bit further down the board, like fifth, sixth round, would be Cody Simon out of Ohio State. He was kind of an afterthought going into the year. Everyone was talking about like Sonny Styles moving from safety to linebacker and how exciting athlete. And Cody was just kind of the old vets, the fifth year senior that, or actually it might have been a 6 year senior that
Yeah.
people just didn't talk about him much because he was just kind of a veteran guy, played a lot of special teams, but he had a great year. He really had a great year. Tested pretty well. As also, I think he's going to be a dynamite special teamer if nothing else, but another guy that physical downhill can run well enough to play in the NFL. So he's an interesting one. And then my Notre Dame fandom, I got to mention real quick, Jack Kaiser, who's a bit of a he's more of your smaller will linebacker type. He's not a true Mike, so he wouldn't really mix with. Well, he would mix well with Bobby Wagner, but I don't think he would mix necessarily well with Luvu in kind of in theory. But he's athletic. He can run. Former high school safety that has been a really good special teamer for Notre Dame as well during the course of his career. You probably get him somewhere between the fifth, seventh round, and he has some developmental upside with good range on the second level.
And when you look at the safety position, I think this is one of the lowest depth positions for the Commanders right now. They lost both Derek Forrest to the Bills and Jeremy Chin to the Raiders. They did pick up Will Harris and Jonathan Jones, but it's still a
Yep.
pretty slim position group. If the Commanders do decide to go down that route in the first round, which I think is a solid likelihood, do you have a preference between Nick Amanwari, Malachi Starks, or Xavier Watts at 29?
I mean, if all guys are on the board, I'm still a Malachi Starks fan out of Georgia. I
Mhm.
am. I think that he has when I scout the safety position, one thing that I value tremendously is the ability to create plays from depth, right? So the further down the
Yeah.
field, so you think about like a single high free safety is a great example of that. And I think that out of those three players, Starks fits that mold the best. He can make some really rangy plays working from depth, and he has that true free safety kind of profile to him. So if he's on the board, that's a guy that I would target absolutely. Nick Amanwari is a different animal. He's more of your 6'3" plus, 220-pound strong safety. Like he's a Cam Chancellor esque player. But if you want a
Mhm.
guy that's going to come down towards the line of scrimmage, he's going to be active in the run game. He's going to rob short zones. He's going to cover tight ends. Like that's more what Nick Amanwari has. And if he's our 29, I would be very open to that.
Yeah.
Xavier Watts, Xavier Watts is more of your too high safety that has really good coverage instincts, not as athletic as either one of the two previous players, but he's smarter than just about anybody in this class overall. Like he's always in the right spot. He has great ball skills, was a high school wide receiver, actually played wide receiver at Notre Dame early on in his career um, before moving fully to safety for the Fighting Irish. So he has great ball skills, great range. I would say though that 29 would be a little bit rich for me for Xavier Watts. I think Xavier Watts is more of a day 2 football player, but he's a
Mhm.
good football player, and at 29 you're only a couple picks away from being a day 2 operation as well. So if he's a guy that you love, I'm okay with it taking him there, but for me in a pecking order it would go Malachi Starks, Nick Amanwari, then Xavier Watts at pick 29.
Now, going back to more of the middle of the draft, the Commanders' current
Yep.
running back room is made up of Austin Eckler, Brian Robinson Jr., Jeremy McNichols, who was recently re signed. Assuming that Washington doesn't take a running back in the first round, it wouldn't make sense. And there's the two main guys, JMT and Amari and Hampton. I don't think either of those guys fall to number 29. So that's kind of
Yep.
off the table for them. Is there anyone towards the middle of the draft that they could target to potentially beef up that position going forward?
Well, good thing for the Commanders is if they are in the running back market, this is the year to be in one because
Yeah,
this is one of the
absolutely.
deepest running back classes. This is probably the deepest running back class I've ever personally evaluated. Like I mean, the Christian McCaffrey year was really good as well, but like just amount of volume of players, this class is as good as any that I've seen. So DJ Giddens out of Kansas State's one of my personal favorites. He's right around 215 pounds, ran 4.43, 40-inch vert, but he is so patient and he has some of the best vision in the class. He is a really, really exciting early down runner. If you want a guy that's more of a pass game weapon, maybe a Brashard Smith out of SMU is an interesting one. He started his career at Miami actually as a wide receiver and transitioned to a running back for SMU. So he ran 4.38, I think, at the combine. So he's got some juice. He has some pass catching upside, obviously, for his wide receiver background. But I mean, really, throughout the draft, I mean, Woody Marks from USC is a guy that I like a ton. There's going to be the Cam Scattabos if you want just a big bruiser out of Arizona State. There are guys in the middle to late round in the draft that will play football in 2025 and will be a part of a committee without question.
And circling back to pick number 29, I think we mentioned the safety position. I think the most likely outcome right here for the Commanders is probably a cornerback, in which one of the main potential targets could be Maxwell Hairston from Kentucky. He's extremely young, ran the fastest 40-yard dash of anyone at the combine, and would probably play on the outside, which would allow Mike Sanders still to work in the slot. I'd say that's where he's probably most comfortable and performs the best. Do you see Hairston being a good option for Washington at this pick? And kind of going along with that, he weighs just 185 pounds. He's not the biggest cornerback. How could that potentially affect him? This is a very good NFC East wide receiver group
Mhm.
going against CD Lamb, AJ Brown 2 times a year. Is that going to hurt him in 1v1 situations?
Not athletically, but if you're the Commanders, it's a little bit of a troubling conversation around weights when Emmanuel Forbes
Yes.
obviously was a part of this conversation a couple years ago and didn't really
Yeah.
work out because he was historically small. But it, Harrison's not as small as him, so I'm not as worried, right? Like he's fine in his profile that he's at. But I mean, the kid can run with anybody, right? He has some of the best recovery speed in this. Well, he has the best recovery speed probably in this class, and he has some of the best just twitch and explosiveness overall. The one thing about Hairston, because I like him a lot, but the one thing about Hairston is if you're talking about him matching up against wide receiver ones early on in his career, his technique at the line of scrimmage does need to be a little bit better. His feet get a little bit lazy because I mean, he can lose a step against a guy and he can recover so well because of his speed that he just kind of gets a little lazy out of his pedal. But if you can really fine tune those techniques and get him a little bit better at the line of scrimmage and transitioning a little bit earlier in reps, I think that he can cover just about anybody. So if he's the pick at 29, I think it's a good overall selection. He's a really good talent in what is a very deep cornerback class in 2025 as well.
And another interesting first round cornerback could be Azarie Thomas from Florida State. He's a press corner, obviously uses his size to his advantage. If both Thomas and Hairston are available at that pick 29, do you have a preference between the two?
I like Harrison a little bit more, but it really is about what you're looking for in a corner, right? Because like you
Mhm.
said, and it was
Yeah.
very well stated, AZ Thomas is a press corner. Like he is a guy that's going to get in your face, going to get in your grill, he's going to be physical with you. Harrison's not that's not really Harrison's game. Harrison's more of he's an off man corner, a guy that's going to have recovery speed, like that type of thing. So it really is what flavor you like. But A's and Thomas, I think he's got good transitional quickness. I think he's got really good hips. He's physical at the line of scrimmage, like I said. Doesn't have great long speed though. I mean, at the pro day, excuse me, I think he ran between like 4.56 and 4.6 flat. So like he's not a burner, and that might hurt him against some guys uncovering down the field. But I would take Harrison over AZ. But I necessarily wouldn't think it's a bad pick. It's just if you're going to draft him, you need to play a lot of press man because that's what he does well. The worst thing that NFL teams do sometimes is they draft players to fit systems that don't really fit their style well and their play style directly. And I think that if you're drafting him to be an off man corner, it's not going to end up too well. But if you're drafting AZ Thomas to come in and be a press man corner and be physical, then he's got a chance to be a really good one.
Now, the last potential first round player that I want to take a look at is Marshall defensive lineman Mike Green, who led the FBS last season with 17 total sacks. Does it worry you that Green has a slightly lighter frame than some of the top ranked defensive ends in this class? And I don't know if he has a lighter frame. I don't know if he was necessarily affected by that in the Sun Belt Conference against not
Right.
quite as good competition. What would that have looked like in a Big Ten, in an SEC? Would that have played a bigger role? Would that have affected him more at those bigger conferences?
Yeah, it would have, and I think it's going to affect him more at the NFL level. Not only is
Yeah.
he just a little lighter, I mean, he bulked up to 251 for the draft process, but he was playing in the 240s last year. But he also has a little bit of shorter arms, so if we're talking about the ability to lock out at the point of attack, if we're talking about the ability to set a firm edge, like he's a little bit of a lighter guy that has below average arm strength. So I just think that he's going to be average to below average run defender in the NFL, but I also don't think you're drafting Mike Green to be a great run defender. Like you're drafting him in this class to be a great pass rusher. That's what it is. And he has those traits, obviously. He's explosive, he's bendy, he's got some crazy short area explosiveness, and also he's got some really good tools in the tool belt as well. So if you're drafting him at 29, you're drafting him for his pass rush ability. If you're drafting him because you think he's going to be a great run defender early, you're probably going to be mistaken. Like that's just not going to be his bag. But as a pass rusher, he's got a lot of tools to like.
Now, I do have one final question to ask before we wrap things up. If there was one piece of advice you could give to an aspiring sports broadcaster and journalist like me, what would it be?
Oh, that's a great question. Can I give you two? Is it okay if I give you two real quick? It could be
Absolutely, yeah.
interrelated. Okay, awesome. So I would say the two biggest things that I would suggest, and I learned this the hard way, honestly, because I didn't know anybody in the space. Like I grew very organically and very slowly in the industry. One I would say is don't be don't be put off by the race to where you want to go. Everybody has goals that they have and what they where they to get to, whether it is as a broadcaster, whether it is as a journalist, whether it is as an evaluator, whatever it is. Just be patient. And it's a tough thing to say, but everybody's journey is completely different. Like mine was a very imperfect road to get to where I am at this point. Some people have a much cleaner road. Some people's are bumpier than mine. Like it, everybody has a different journey. So don't be afraid of the journey. Just enjoy it and do your best. And the second part is to be as unique as you can, to be yourself along the process. Like that was one thing that I learned very early. There's a lot of people in this industry that want your job. And there's a lot of people in this industry that do the same thing, right? There's a lot of analysts out there. There's a lot of journalists out there. There's a lot of freelance writers out there. They're all out there. And I think the fault that too many people fall into is that they kind of just want to be this. They want to follow. They want to follow a recipe to get to where they want to go, and they become very cookie cutter. And they all just kind of sound the same. They write the same. It's just very boring and there's no substance to it. The greatest thing that I think you can be is be yourself and to be organic and then to be ultimately unique in this space. Because at the end of the day, when you do get to a point where you're trying to find a full time job or you're interviewing for another job, all those types of things, the person that usually gets the job isn't always the one that is most deserving of the job. It isn't always the person that's the best writer. It's the person that stands out and that someone can look at and say, I love the uniqueness of that. I believe in that person. So be unique and don't be afraid to run your race. I think both those things in the long run will help out somebody kind of keep an even keel and to get where they want to go. Because ultimately everyone has goals, but it's all about the journey to get to those goals.
Yeah, I can't thank you enough for that advice. And I really appreciate you coming on. Is there anything else you want to say to the people watching before we wrap things up? Where can they find some of your work?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, at Rise and Draft on Twitter. You can go to A to Z Sports, but I mostly just want to thank you so much for having me, Matthew. I mean, when you message me and I'm like, this kid's 13 and he's kicking butt already, man. So you're doing a great job, and I just want to congratulate you on everything you're doing, and please continue to do it.
Yeah, I really appreciate the kind words. Again, big thanks to Ryan Roberts for being the 50th ever Highlight Haven interview guest. And as always, we will see you next time.